guys? Welcome back to the Eye on Stone podcast. I'm Anderson Miller, and this is going to be my spoiler review of Guardians of the Galaxy 3. But before I get into it, a word from our sponsor.
Do you want to start a podcast? Well, now you can, for free. And it's as easy as downloading the new Spotify podcast app to your phone and or computer and hitting record. Spotify Podcasts allows you to record anytime or upload files and provides all the tools you'll need to make your episode sound as solid as stone. Spotify Podcasts is the new home for any podcasters looking to expand their brand and reach new audiences across the globe.
All right, so I already said it, but just so no one gets mad at me, spoiler alert. I repeat, spoiler alert. I'm kind of spoiling this movie. I'm going to hold back on doing a full-blown spoiler discussion until I'm sitting down with other people and we can talk about the whole trilogy, because I think that would be an awesome episode, and it's something I really want to do. In my opinion, I will say right off the bat, I think the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is the best out of any other, multiple film story arc within the Marvel movies when it pertains to an individual or an individual group. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 is one of, if not my favorite MCU movie. It's very close. And it's so crazy to say because, I've been very honest about the fact that I've never really been a Marvel guy. Even when it came to reading comics. I grew up reading Spider-Man and his Rogues Gallery I was very familiar with. X-Men kind of, Fantastic Four kind of, the Hulk a little bit, but just really wasn't as into it as I was DC when I was growing up. And, Iron Man just kind of changed the game in a lot of ways. But for me, it just really brought me into the fold. And then after that first movie, I was just hooked. I was like, okay, this is cool, So I was familiar with Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, obviously, Hulk. So yeah, you had these movies coming out, but then I'll never forget being in the theater and seeing a teaser for Guardians of the Galaxy, and you see this very strange bunch of people walking in front of the screen. It looks like they're at a lineup at a police station or something, and I was just like, what am I looking at right now? We got a green person, we've got a gray dude with red all over him, we got a tree, a raccoon. I was really confused. So, knew nothing about Guardians of the Galaxy, and even to this day, I still haven't read comics or anything, but James Gunn made me love the characters in terms of the MCU. I love the first movie, from the soundtrack to the way they did the credits at the end of the movie. I mean, I don't know. That movie is just so well done, and it's, again, one of my favorites, if not my favorite. And James Gunn's just good at doing that. I was a big fan of his Suicide Squad movie. I didn't love it, but again, I just think he's good at having this group of interesting characters that are forced to be together due to circumstance and making a good, heartfelt, action-packed story that, keeps you intrigued from beginning to end. So he's definitely mastered that, in my opinion. Now, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I liked it, but it was weak for me, if I'm being honest. The overall plot was and it's actually my least favorite soundtrack also out of the 3 soundtracks from the movies. So, other than the scenes with Baby Groot doing funny things and I guess the continuation of Gamora and Peter's, arc in terms of their romance or, whatever you want to call it. Just really wasn't a fan. Now, Yondu really shined throughout that movie. And so that's one thing I always remark on besides, Baby Groot and whatnot. But, it missed the mark for me. And I don't really blame anybody for that necessarily. I think that movie was released at a weird time when it was trying to be its own thing, but it also had to morph into like what was going off the greater DCU or MCU, just because there was so much going on in terms of building up to Avengers Infinity War and all that. Um, so I feel like, things happen that maybe wouldn't have happened if that movie had come out at a different time. Like Drax, his character got nerfed down so much, and it was kind of heartbreaking, honestly, because I love Dave Bautista as an actor. For me, he has gone above all of the other, actors that have tried to, branch out from wrestling. He's on a whole other level. I think he is so good, and he was great as Drax. And yes, I love the comic relief with his character and everything, but I also really appreciated the emotional connection I could have with his character in the first film. And that was completely ripped out, and I don't even want to say it was backburnered. It was almost just thrown in the trash when it came to any appearance he had after the first movie. And I thought that was pretty tragic, and it sucked. But I think, again, it's not anyone's fault. It was just what they were trying to work toward. It didn't make sense to have this guy be one of the main guys that's going to be up against Thanos. So I understand why it had to happen that way. I just think it sucks. So now getting into volume 3, I'll start off by saying Drax is one of my favorite parts in the movie. Yes, he is still comic relief, and I don't have a problem with that. I actually really enjoyed most of the comedy in this movie, which surprised me because James Gunn's taste for comedy doesn't always land with me. And that's fine. I know there's other people that they think his comedy is amazing. There's some people that think his comedy is just all dick and fart jokes, which it's not. But that's the common thing now, just because he sprinkled some in Suicide Squad. But anyways, I actually really appreciated the fact that Drax kind of had a completion with his arc near the end of the movie, because he goes on this journey of losing his family and wanting revenge. And then he's just known as being, oh yeah, Drax the Destroyer, who's goofy and stupid and, really can't do much. Like, that's, even his, like, own team acknowledges him as being that guy. And if you think about his appearances in the Avengers movies, he was definitely a secondary, like, far backburnered character. He didn't really have any time to shine. And again, I think that sucks, but when you have a million characters you're trying to fit in a 3-hour movie, it's kind of hard to give them each their time. But anyways, so in this movie, to come back to the loss factor with him, and he was a father, he wanted to be a dad. I thought it was really cool. And it's actually one of the moments in the movie that actually, got me a little teary-eyed. I was like, oh, man, was when he's referred to as not being a destroyer, but he was meant to be a father. I was like, dang, man. Like, that hit. So, yeah, my hat's off to James Gunn for using the fact that this movie isn't really connecting to anything else going on in terms of, like, building up to the next, because we don't really know what we're going toward, right? The MCU's kind of been in a state of, let's throw darts at a board and see where it lands. At least that's what it's felt like. So I think he took advantage of that fact and was able to kind of close on some things that he was, setting up in his first film. And I love that, because I'm a big fan of promising something and delivering on it later. Now, usually I like that a lot earlier in a story, if you look at how long this story's been being told with these characters, but it was still really nice to see that kind of brought back in. And you feel like Drax actually becomes something more by the end of this movie. His interactions with the kids that are being held prisoner, I thought that was great. You could just tell, like, oh man, he was probably a great dad. So I don't know. I just thought that was really cool. Really appreciated the fact that we got to, bring that back on in and give it a proper close. So that was one of my favorite things about the movie, was Drax. and that's kind of cool. I was not going into that expecting that. And then obviously Rocket Raccoon, his story's tragic, and I won't go into too much detail about that, but you know just Nebula saying that's worse than anything Thanos ever did to me. They're watching that security footage that's in the database that they steal, and they see him getting experimented on, and these awful things. So the fact that Nebula said that, I was like, wow, man. Um, Something I'm very happy they did, that I was like, oh, okay. Like at the end of the movie, I was shocked because I thought it was going to be one of those predictable things. Gamora and Peter do not reconnect in the movie. Yeah, it's definitely like subtly hinted that like at the very end of the movie when they're back to each other, you can tell that she's at least starting to not consider them being together, but possibly just playing with the idea of like what it would be like to be in a relationship with this guy. And I thought that was really cool because it felt open ended, sure, but it also was just like, hey, you know what? Sometimes you just have to accept change and move on, And I thought that was really cool to not just give us everything that we would expect with this movie. Like it's nice to be surprised. So that was cool. And then especially later when you see, Peter goes home and then they say he's going to be, big spoiler alert here, Starlord is returning. Okay, that kind of gave me chills because that's reminiscent of the days where we were building up to Avengers, Infinity War, right? Like they would say, Captain America will return or Thor will, it's like, okay. And especially because we know that the Guardians of the Galaxy movies are finished, at least in terms of the original group with James Gunn. James Gunn has moved on to DC Studios as he's got a lot on his plate now. So it's like, what's to come of these guys? And I thought that was really cool. It was nice to have an end credit scene that actually felt worth sticking around for. You've got the banter with him and his grandpa, and then it says that. I remember me and my wife looked at each other like, oh, okay, because we thought all of these characters were done, like. So, yeah, excited to see that. I honestly expect if there was going to be any spinoffs that we were going to get a Rocket and Groot spinoff. That's kind of what I was expecting to see a tease for or something. So again, I was surprised and pleasantly. I feel like we're doing different things than what I anticipated. So that was really cool. Before I talk about the negatives, I feel like there's some more positives here. You got to give me a second. Oh, the soundtrack. I love the soundtrack. I mean, you've got when Earth, Wind, and Fire came on, I was like, oh man, because I grew up listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire. Like my parents were huge fans. So this soundtrack is definitely one. My wife and I are getting a record player, and we've been talking about like vinyls we want to get. And one of the first ones she said was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. And I was like, heck yeah, because I love that soundtrack. And then Volume 2, I was just kind of on. But this soundtrack, I said to her last night, we were going home, I'm like, I am definitely wanting to get that on vinyl. Like, it's a great soundtrack. So, yeah, I don't. It felt like this movie was a proper sequel to the first one, just in terms of tone and the soundtrack quality, and also just the story. It was very well written. I thought this movie was very well written. I will get into some negatives. Adam Warlock, I don't hate the character. He just almost didn't feel necessary, other than like in the beginning of the movie when he gets sent. That's kind of like how things start to pick up, is like he's hunting down Rocket to basically save his people. And if they had just shown that and then he didn't have an appearance in the rest of the movie, that would have been cool for me, because it's like, okay, I want to see more of that guy. Like, he looks super powerful and crazy, and he got bested now, but he might return. But for him to have this, for me, what would be a massive story arc for a guy like him, just kind of being shoehorned into a 2 hour and 30-minute movie, it didn't really work for me personally. Now, again, I didn't hate the character, and I actually am intrigued to see what they do with him, but I just felt like that was very shoehorned in, and I kind of wonder what was going on behind the scenes with that, because I feel like James Gunn does a really good job of fleshing things out with people. So I don't see him being the guy that wants to just shove people in here and just be like, oh yeah, we can tell that story real quick, just boom boom boom. It all happens too fast for me, and I kind of just wish he was introduced and then he continued to appear in other things, and then eventually he has this redemption, or whatever. But either way, now I will say the shot of him with Starlord floating in space, obviously that was a nod to divine intervention. He brought him back to life. That was a really cool shot. I actually, that was cool. So I wasn't a huge fan of his story in the movie or his presence, but I did like that shot. So there's that. And there's a lot of beautiful shots in this movie. I'll tell you what, you give James Gunn a good soundtrack with some nostalgia music, like music that really just drives that nostalgia, and then beautiful CGI'd space, almost paintings. Like sometimes his shots look like absolute paintings. One of my favorite scenes out of the MCU is Peter and Gamora when the sparks are coming off of the ship and you can just see space in the background, and they're looking at each other and they're listening to his soundtrack. He gave her an earphone. That is one of my favorite shots in the MCU. It is beautiful. It is so beautiful, from the music to the aesthetic and the CGI, and it's beautiful. Like, the space just looks absolutely amazing. So I don't know. I'm gonna get on a tangent real quick, but people really don't appreciate James Gunn enough, in my opinion. That might be a hot take, but I think this guy is a great filmmaker. I really do. I think he's really good at what he does. I think if you give him free reign to do something, he's going to consider all the variables with, what property is in his hands, and he's going to try to deliver the best version of that. And it's so hard for me not to appreciate that. Like I said, I didn't love the Suicide Squad, but if you're going to make a movie about the Suicide Squad, I think that's pretty much how it should be done. Okay, that's kind of where I'm at with it. Especially versus what we got in 2016, 15, whatever it was, the Studio Squad. Like, that was just a mess. But he had a solid tone from beginning to end, and he had a story, and he completed it, and he let all the characters have their own little, time to shine. And I don't know. I think that if you're going to do a movie like that, that's how you would do it. And I can say that about his Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Like, he knows how to take what is on the table and make the best thing out of it. And so that's one reason I'm still not someone who's going to stomp Volume 2 into the mud, because I think he did the best he could with what he had at the time. And the things, again, you got people poking their head in, saying, hey, make sure this connects to this, make sure you tease this, blah, 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 blah. It makes it hard for you to get your vision out there. So, and yeah, I'm not saying I'm going to be a fan of everything he does. I'm just saying that I can appreciate that this guy, like I said, he takes time to read about these characters. You can tell that he is well knowledgeable about them. He takes time to, picture how to best bring them to the screen and what would be the best, honest adaptation of them. And I appreciate that attention to detail. I appreciate the effort he puts into it, and heart. This guy puts heart into his stories. So, and I appreciate that as well. Like, no matter how goofy or crazy they are, he finds a way to, crank on those heart knobs, and he does it so well. So, it's going to be very interesting now, because this movie, if you ask me, is a hit. Like, my theater, the theater my wife and I went to, it was packed. People were clapping at the end. You know how long it's been since I've seen a Marvel movie where people clapped at the end? Avengers Endgame. It's been a while. So I'm just saying, like, this guy just killed it with this, last film. And it's going to be the last thing he has come out before his Superman. It's going to be very interesting to see how this sways, and it probably won't change anything, but it'll probably be a narrative of this is why he should stay at Marvel. I don't know. But for me, I was already excited to see what he does with Superman. Again, he's not my choice. But now I'm like, okay, you know what? This kind of like reminded me that this guy is a great filmmaker. He appreciates the fact that he gets to take these properties and he knows that he's got to be careful with them. He's very careful in how he handles them and how he, brings them to us, the audience. And I appreciate that. Even with Adam Warlock, like, again, I feel like that guy was kind of shoved in the movie. And, maybe there was a cut of this movie where his arc had more to it, more time on screen to breathe. But either way, I felt like James Gunn still did a great job with, handling his character. I didn't dislike anything about his character. He's got some subtle, comedic moments, and I've seen some people unhappy about that. But if you look at the fact that they say, he was released from the pod too early, he's young, his mom says he's got to, figure out how to do this. Like, can you imagine Adam Warlock, when he has time to find himself as a person and like harness this power he has? I mean, it's going to be insane. So I'm excited for that, and that's, again, thanks to James Gunn. So I don't know. All I got to say is that for me, this film was really good. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. I didn't love everything about it, of course, but for the most part, it was really good. And I think he just knows how to take characters like this and really tell a compelling story. And again, he made me a fan of these characters that I knew nothing about prior to seeing that first teaser in the theater. And if I could go back and tell that version of me, dude, these characters are going to be a part of one of your favorite movies and favorite trilogies in the MCU, I would not believe me. I would be like, no way, dude. Talking tree, talking raccoon, this looks stupid. Because that's what I thought at the time. So, I just want to say thank you to James Gunn. I know he's not going to watch this or anything, but like, seriously, thank you for this amazing ride. You've made me care about each and every one of these characters, even down to Cosmo. And it's been quite the journey with these characters, and it's sad to see them coming to an end in terms of that specific group. But we do get teased a new band of heroes, and Groot looked freaking awesome in that. At least I thought. But anyways, I'm interested to see what they do with the new Guardians of the Galaxy possibly. And my wife and I were talking about, again, this is going to get super spoilery, but we were talking about, okay, what do they do with Starlord? And I proposed to her last night, and she said, that would be awesome. It'd be cool for me if they did a Disney Plus series with Starlord where it shows him, he's come home. So we see him coming home. And you could have the comedy aspect of like he's trying to get integrated with modern society on Earth. Whether it's like cars with auto start, or like maybe you have a episode where he has to go to driving school, or I don't know, just funny stuff like if you've seen Dragon Ball Z when they have to go to driver's ed, like you got Vegeta trying to drive a car. I don't know, just you could have like subtle comedy like that, but I think it would also be very interesting to see this guy who was born on Earth and he's been away for all this time. And I'm not counting him being in New Asgard. No. Like, you got him coming home, seeing his family, trying to be an Earthling after seeing all these incredible things and being all these incredible places. Like, that's a really interesting story to tell in itself. And I said, the conflict that he could have would be the Ravengers. For whatever reason, maybe they have to come to Earth for something, or who knows. But you have Gamora and him crossing paths at some point, and that's where that romance starts to be kind of rekindled. And then maybe it ends with her wanting to go back out into space because that's what she knows, and he's wanting to stay on Earth. Like I think that'd be a really cool story to tell. So that's just my pitch, but who knows? I'm sure they've already got this stuff written down somewhere, and they're working towards something. So it's gonna be interesting to see. But yeah, guys, so that's my review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I loved it. I really did. It felt so good to go to a theater and see a MCU film because it's been a while. It has. I was a big fan of Doctor Strange, but it was weird and different. And, this movie just felt like one of the movies that we would see building up to Avengers Infinity War, and I missed that feeling. And again, they hit us at the end with Starlord will return. I was like, cool, we're back in it, So I'm excited to see what all they do. But I'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, subscribe down below. Hit the thumb on hand, whether it's up or down. We don't care because just here to have fun until we get canceled or I get canceled or whoever gets canceled. I don't know. But either way, thanks for tuning in, guys. See you later.